Hello and welcome to the program, People, Politics and Power. In many developing countries of the world today, where governance structures and institutions are weak, where strong men lord it over former institutions of state, civil society organizations have emerged as the fifth estate of the realm. They have become, in some countries, the unofficial opposition to state power, the eyes, the ears of the civil populace, watchdogs and advocates for people's rights. In Nigeria, the achievement of development through good governance is a crucial pressing issue. 2.5 decades after the return to democratic rule, good governance, the object of every democratic system, is an essential for socio-economic development. Some analysts say Nigeria has not fared any better than most other developing countries in terms of the application of democratic principles for socio-economic and political development. Hence, the civil society organizations, which were in the forefront of the pro-democracy struggle against military dictatorships, are still in the trenches, promoting good governance standards in the face of the country's weak institutions, lack of transparency, accountability, and growing inequality, conditions which combine to undermine good governance and development. The civil society organizations are therefore involved in advocacy on many fronts, including the rule of law and the fostering of trust and legitimacy in governance processes. They have also been involved in advancing the rights of citizens, especially of marginalized groups, for inclusive development. But how well have they performed their self-assigned roles in the last 2.5 decades of uninterrupted democracy in Nigeria? What tools and strategies have they deployed in carrying out their tasks and in achieving their goals and objectives? How much impact have those strategies made in shaping government policies and in promoting the welfare and well-being of targeted populations? How well have their initiatives and efforts been received in official government circles? And then, of course, we must ask, what are the major obstacles or challenges to the effectiveness of the civil society organizations? These are the issues we'll be looking at on the program today. And, of course, I have with me in the studio 2 of my guests, and another will be joining us virtually when we return from this very short break. Stay with us.
Nigeria of our dream. The Nigeria we need is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT.
All right, let's get to meet our guest analysts. Right here in the studio, we have Comrade Ezenwa Nwagu. Comrade Nwagu is Executive Director, Operation Nigeria, a board member, Yaga Africa, and Executive Director, Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa. Comrade Nwagu, thank you so much for coming.
Good to see you.
Welcome. Also joining us is Austin Aigbe, former Senior Program Officer at the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, former Program Manager at International Republican Institute, IRI, and currently a member of the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Welcome. We're also joined virtually by Newton Osemaye. Newton is the Program Director, Initiative for Policy Intervention and Development. He also consults for Action Aid Nigeria on systems and structure strengthening approach against radicalization to violent extremism. Newton, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure being with you.
Welcome. So, gentlemen, Now, let me begin with you, Comrade Ezenwa. Civil society organizations have been with us, particularly from the days of military rule, and we're in the forefront of the struggle for democracy in Nigeria. Now, after that, everyone thought that the work of civil society would end with the advent of democracy. But that has not been so. Civil society organizations are even now much more with us than they were in those days. So what exactly is the role of civil society organizations such as the ones that you head and work for in society?
Well, I think it's important to frame properly because roles differ at different stages. Under the military, the role was, if you permit the use of that word, adversarial. It was one in which you were dealing with a dictatorship, authoritarian state, and the means of engaging was more in terms of, because they were not open to engagement, you were called disgruntled civilians. It was a commandist structure. So at that point in time, the struggle was for the restoration of civil rule and democracy. And you had groups. You also had personality cults, if you like, who necessarily may not have belonged to groups, but they were playing active role in the demilitarization process that we had at that time. Now we have transited to civil rule. The role is changing. There are more platforms of engagement. The engagements can be collaboration, it can be consultative, it can be confrontational. So now there are different ways. For instance, the struggle, for instance, for sunshine laws, the ones like you have the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Procurement Act, all of those things were investments of civil society. In fact, the creation of organizations like institutions like BPP were derivatives from the struggle of civil society. So when you talk about civil society during the military and the post-military, you will have to engage them from the point of the role that they are playing now. Now you have civil society organizations who are dealing in health issues. Some are dealing with good governance issues. Some are dealing with, different kinds of things, elections and the rest of them. So there are varied, platforms of engagement in civil, rule than you had under the military. So that's why you see as if there's a prominence in terms of, but there are many people who still look at civil society from that lens, from the lens of the head with which coconut will be broken for everyone to eat. What we did under the military, where the people were in recession and there were people who were the vanguard of the struggle for military rule. And then, sometimes also appropriated. That's why you see people say today that we sacrifice for this, as if it should be for some people. But under democracy, we should galvanize the people. It does not envisage the place for personality cults. It should be about civic groups and organizations, which includes faith-based organizations, traditional institutions, anything that is not government, any platform that is not government should be galvanized for the end point that we are looking at, which is good governance.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, Austin, have we clearly moved away from the adversarial role that the civil society played under the military into full engagement under democratic dispensation?
Thank you very much, sir.
Are there still elements of the adversarial role still very much there now?
Thank you so much. It's good to have, let me create a background. what is civil society so that we don't end up discussing and trying to allocate to some civil society organization, as it were, non-profit organizations, and vis-a-vis civil society organizations and civil society, as it were. First is that the political or economic landscape is rested on the tripod. We have the state, we have the private sector, we have the non-state sector. The state is headed by government, the private sector, of course, businesses and all of that. The non-state is where the civil society appropriately square in. So where you have crises within the state, like comrade I just talked about, the democracy, you are focusing on just one element, like it's stated. And the adversarial is not necessarily in the case of struggle to take. It was because you promised a transition, and it was not coming. And then there was crackdown on civil voices, civic voices, crackdown on the media, crackdown on political opponents, crackdown on political parties. Anything that is not in government, which is a state, that is not in the private sector, dwells within the state, the non-state. For instance, you see some people say, no, I'm not civil society, churches, for instance. They say, I'm not civil society. When you are not government, you are civil society. But there are those who are registered, who become non-profit organizations. And if you check, during the military regime, like being the focus of this question, is that because there was some individuals who forced them way into power and consistently maintained power, there was a need for the civil society organizing. If you check, at some point, the private sector did not join that movement. If you join, the government are going to use their state instrument to crack down on those businesses and then force it down. But because it was a civic system, the mobilization was everyone. You see, the churches, the mosque, the media, part of the media, of course, the union, and all of those civic actors coming together to say no, there was need to the return of democracy. And like you said in the question to comrade, talking about whether it was an end. Apparently, after democracy was achieved, it looked as if, man, we have achieved democracy, let's go back. We never knew that, man, we are going to be discussing all the democratic backsliding, or what people call democratic recession, as it were today, that the civil society fought for democracy, as a comrade said, that we fought it. I wasn't old then, but I played a little role at my lower level then. I was still very much younger in the student union government movement. NAS was part of civil society. SUG part of society. So all of those action, it is not adversarial. It is that you forced your way in, talking about the military regime. So you need a counter force. But today, it is no more some kind of fight. It is becoming an idealistic movement. That if you say that, for instance, let's stay a bit with elections. If you say that elections is not working well, we are trying to provide those insights that shows that what we are headed towards is a kind of backsliding that happened during the days of Shagari that eventually led to the coup in 1983, and then that snowballed to today that we are still referring to, whether it's military or democratic system. There is no form. You may look at it from an adversarial point of view. It's actually saying that you are holding a position that is not yours. Conduct an election, let the people decide who rules for them, who rules them. And that's the whole idea. And not necessarily, because if you are going to go, it was even the military who saw it as an adversary point and came up with guns and all of that. Thank God you have comrade now with you. Apparently, maybe his comrade of his type at that time were on the street. Man, let their life for the democracy we're enjoying today. But however, they just, in quote, maybe being lucky. And today we see them, and many more. There are many of them. You saw recently the president honored a few of those comrades who fought that struggle. It was never seen from a point of view of some kind of adversary. It was a struggle. In civil society, we usually say struggle, because of the person on the other side will not want to give up what he has, because military will not want to pull out without some form of struggle. And that struggle is what led to it, to what you enjoy today as democracy.
All right, Newton, let's bring you in. We have talked about engagement in the democratic dispensation. How much of that is actually happening right now? I mean, from 1999, when we returned to democracy in Nigeria, how much engagement has democratic governments had with civil society? And how do you measure the success or failure of such engagements? Newton, you need to unmute your microphone so that we can hear you in the studio.
Yeah, thank you very much. I said to a large extent, and also trying to be fair with the Nigerian government, I think the Nigerian government has actually opened that space for conversation, for dialogue, for negotiation, and what have you to happen. Like Eze said, the BPP was a product of negotiation and conversation that happened between government and civil society organizations in Nigeria. Electoral reform is also another one that has happened over time. The space has already been created for civil society to engage in the process. But in terms of measuring, it can only be measured by proxy, by the things I just mentioned now. What are those things that have happened between 1999 till date? If you look at those things that has happened because of the space that the government has created, you will agree with me that some level of concession, if you like, have been given to civil society organizations to engage in the space, that government has actually created. Again, riding on what my colleague also said there in the studio, in terms of adversarial and struggle, I think there's a thin line between being adversarial and also being in the struggle. There's a thin line because during the military, I think the military was seen as enemies to democracy. They were enemies to good governance. They were enemies to the plight of the people and the welfare of the people. The country was not run by any democratically elected government. It was not run by any constitution, as it were. So civil society organizations sees those usurpers as people who came behind doors to mount, to take over the seat of power. And the way they were dealt with was actually as enemies, that these guys need to get out of power. So it was adversarial in the first place. But now in democracy, what we look at for is actually more of negotiation. And that is one of the things that I will always recommend, that the government is out for the welfare of the society. Civil society organizations is out for the welfare of the society. The private sector is also out for the welfare of the society, but with an interest, which is the profit that they make from it. So I think more collaborations and more negotiations and more space need to be opened by this government for civil society to actually participate in governance, as it were, so that we can begin to get the dividend of democracy that we all are aspiring for.
Okay, comrades, let's look at the tools that are deployed by civil society groups and organizations in engagement with and negotiations with government agencies, because ultimately the goal is to see that there is good governance that will deliver democratic dividends and deliver development in society. What are those tools that civil society groups and organizations and strategies that they have adopted? I mean, all civil society organizations cannot adopt the same kind of tools and strategies. But what are those main tools? Is it just advocacy, pure and simple?
Well, first is to look at what are the intrinsic values of democracy. The first and most critical one is freedom. The dividends, what we refer to as dividends, bridges, roads, the military. In fact, the current civilian actors should apologize to the military if we are looking at what we call dividends. Gwarimpa was built by the military. The bridges, Third Mainland and the rest of them, the Transcorp and the city you have today that is called Abuja. So in terms of, if you look at, but the intrinsic value of democracy is the very idea that we can engage in this studio without looking behind our backs. And to think that that is not important is something that baffles me at times. As one who got expelled, suspended from the university, expelled, detained several times for voicing an alternative view. Today, you have alternative media spread all over the place. If I can't say what I want to say here, I can say it some other place. That value cannot be quantified in monetary terms. And it is one of the gains, one of the strong gains of the struggle of civic groups and organizations, that we were able to restore freedom to our citizens. So I just need to contextualize that.
Yeah.
In terms of tools, the tools differ. I talked about the 3 C's. Is today there are vestiges of dictatorship, vestiges of authoritarianism, vestiges that want to muzzle alternative voices. They're still there, which is something that we inherited from the military. So when you are engaging, you start with engagement. You consult, you try to collaborate. Where all that fails, you confront. So it's not, when I say that, I said in the time of post-military, post-civilian struggle, most of our processes were adversarial. We had to engage because there is even no window of conversation. They ruled with decrees. They took decisions that are not democratic. They appointed surrogates in state institutions, whether in the judiciary or in the universities. Vice chancellors were actually departments of the military. So today, there are, whether you like it or not, most of these institutions are civilianizing. And our own language also, in terms of tools, is also civilianizing. What does that mean? We are adopting, in the days you are talking about, you are celebrated for how much on count you are, how much you are able to use, strong language. But today, you are invited to a meeting. The superiority of the logic of your argument will carry the day. Today, ASU can go to meetings, win processes, but those days they will lock you up. They will detain you. You are not going to have any opportunity. They will close down the universities, lock everybody up. But today there are processes, even when those vestiges of dictatorship are still there. But you can nibble at them through superior logic. And so in terms of tools, what we are using is the platforms that democracy has given us, which number one is a media. The media can now give our voice. Nobody is listening. Nobody is hearing us, so they don't care about what we are saying. That's not true. If you insult anybody on this program, by the time you finish, the folks who have responsibility, they will be waiting for you. That to show you that they are listening. And they are taking notes. And some of the, many times we are uncharitable to ourselves. We don't want to agree that there are shifts, there are improvements in the struggles that we have waged. In every area, today, whether you like it or not, you cannot just go and buy a job at the gate of an entity. Even if the process is rigged, you will still have to tender. You will still have to go through the process. Unlike before, where contracts, people hawk contracts in front of. There is some method now, even if you are going to rig that process. So it is part of what the civil society has implanted, has inflicted on this civil rule, that whether you like it or not, there has to be some order. Today, National Assembly cannot make a law completely without inviting the public through what they call public hearing to submission of memorandum. Whether they use it or not is now another thing, but what is important is that you have to follow that process. Those are gains.
At least a semblance of process.
They are intrinsic gains. So if you make a law that we do not like, we challenge it. We come on air. Even the president cannot make appointments without being challenged. We have had reversals of appointments that were made by the president. And a friend of mine from another African country was telling me that you civil society in your country, sometimes you don't know the power that you have. That he asked me, he said, which African country president will make an appointment and civil society will come and say they don't want. We are doing that and we are most times getting results, but we may not win all our battles. We may not win all our battles, but we are making progress. So I've identified the fact that, yes, there are vestiges of dictatorship that are still remaining. You have czars all over the states who run actually as military despots than elected people. They struggle to contain them. It's not a tea party, but we have the opportunity to do so, which was different when the military was there.
All right, so Austin, Comrade Ezenwa has said that we have moved from the era of pure confrontation with the military to what we now call, what he now describes as consultation, collaboration, and possibly confrontation, which is rare these days. But 2.5 decades, 25 years after the return to democracy, how much impact has that process made in terms of the influence of governmental policies and in delivering what we refer to commonly as dividends of democracy to the people, good governance?
You know, when somebody has said before that when you say good governance, doesn't mean that there is bad governance. And there's that argument. So governance is governance. So you are supposed to engage in government, in governance. And there are certain things you need to do. And that's what created good and bad. But in all honesty, there's been a shift. It is clear. Nobody will argue about development as it were in terms of infrastructure and all of that. You will argue that the military has it more. I mean, it's clear. There's no argument about that. But in terms of freedom, freedom creates opportunity for development. In Amartya Singh's work, he talked about freedom and development. And in that work, he tried to conceptualize that without freedom, you can't have development. What does that mean? You could build all manner of infrastructure, all the highways. If there is no human capacity development in a way that there is freedom, as everyone has tried to explain, when we talk about rights, it's hidden within freedom. When I speak, and I speak because I've got the right to speak, even though I know that where my right ends, another person's own begins by way of conceptualization, is that the work of good governance has moved. You may say Nigeria has just been moving up, in and out by way of trajectory, but we have moved consistently. 25 good years is not a joke. I mean, even though Ghana is more older than us in democracy, is that today we can look, in fact, I'm not afraid to look at the Nigerian president and I ask my question. I can engage at any level. I am not. But I know even the Ghanaians of this world could not even face the military, because if you face the military, you may not return back. We know of the chair of ASUS who never returned. If I write in their homes, they were bundled up in the night because there's a meeting tomorrow. Civil society organizations having meetings ahead of a planned protest tomorrow. By today, they are bundled up and kept somewhere. Right now, that is happening in Burkina Faso. What we experienced in Nigeria years ago by way of development, we can't say there's no development in Burkina Faso. The military is constructing roads, is doing all manner of things. But what development actually means is freedom. If you are not free, you can't use those facilities we are talking about. If you are not free, you can't go to the hospital. If you are not free, you can't move on the street. If I'm not free, I can't come here. And that is important. We put that on the basis of what development means, and that democracy, and what, whether democracy is first or development is second, there's that big argument. In all honesty, this country, Nigeria, since the return to democracy, things has moved. One individual wanted to run for fourth term. It was because there were voices that were allowed, and that was why that came down. We've had in this country, certain government wanted to come out with what they call the social media bill to begin to crack down on voices. It was this same freedom that we had to stop it. And there have been many of such, and we must give credence to that work, whether it's through advocacy, through consultation, through consolidation, or through confrontation. In all honesty, we continue to do this because there will always be the tendency for even an elected official to match the red line. In fact, Obasanjo has said no-go area. I mean, so during the national conference. Why would you say no-go area? Because it doesn't want some conversation that will ignite certain fire in the system. But if you check, if we are fired up then, maybe Nigeria will be better now. We need to continue to talk. We need to continue to speak. We must speak our mind at all time, and democracy allows it, and that's freedom.
Okay, Newton, right? Civil society organizations, as you have heard, have been engaging, they have been collaborating, they have consulting with government and even non-governmental organizations, even with the private sector, as it were. Now, how effective have these initiatives or efforts of the civil society been received in those quarters? I mean, especially in government and private sector quarters. How effective or how well have those efforts been received? And what kind of response was expected by civil society, and how much of that expectation has been met?
Well, to some extent, I think like what my colleagues have said in the studio there, well, freedom to some extent has been guaranteed for people to now have space to negotiate and have conversation or consult with government. But in terms of effectiveness, I don't really think it's been effective across board. Yes, it's been effective in some areas, but it has not been effective across board. For instance, in terms of how government in Nigeria manages protest, is still an old pattern that keep repressing people, suppressing people, and throw protesters into detention and what have you. I know the logic or the reason behind that would be, when they do their security analysis and they know that protests might snowball into serious violence in the country, then they need to curtail it. But I also think that to a large extent in a democratic dispensation, the government of Nigeria should be able to review their methodology in terms of addressing protesters as against what has happened in the past with the military. So in terms of effectiveness, like I said, yes, they have made some gains, but I think not in all. I think it's not in all areas also. And two, elections again. I think Nigerian government is paying deaf ear to some of the reforms that have happened within the electoral space. Though they've listened to civil society organizations and take their contributions into consigned contributions into what they do. But however, in terms of implementation, in full-fledged implementation of that reforms, there are still gaps. So I don't think Nigerian government is effective enough in all areas. But I can't conclude and say that they've been effective generally or they've not been effective generally. In some areas, the engagement has been effective. In some other areas, the engagement has not been very, very effective. And to make it more effective also, let me come back to this. Civil society organizations need to redesign their modus operandi or the ways they engage government. For instance, I think there are civil society organizations that should be involved in research work. For instance, if Nigerian government reel out figures on economic situation of the country, we need alternative reports. We need alternative documents to be able to counter what Nigerian government is telling us. It's not just enough for Nigerian government to say that, our GDP has fallen or our GDP has risen by so and so percent. The next thing is for us to hit the street and start fighting Nigerian government and say, no, everybody is going to be poor, everybody is going to die and whatever. You must have alternative argument, and not just alternative argument that are superior, that you bring before the table for that negotiation. So our civil society organizations need to strongly increase their capacity in terms of conducting research to be able to counter what government is saying at every point in time about policy. And also look at negotiation. Negotiation is a skill. Negotiation is not about how well you can speak, how well you can advocate, or how well you can shout in the street and insult government or whatever. It's a skill. When you are brought to the table, your negotiation skill will actually give you more room to negotiate with this government. I think these are the things that are really lacking between the relationship of government and civil society organizations. There are so many other things that I think civil society organizations need to do so that the space can be strengthening. The little space that the government has given to us can be strengthening more and widening so that there will be more engagement and we all can see the benefit of democracy, like our brother put it, the value, intrinsic value, playing out more for the generality of our people in Nigeria.
Let me come back to you, Newton, very quickly, and to ask, how much is civil society doing at in the rural communities of our country? Most of our people live in those rural areas and rural communities. There is a perception that civil society organizations operate more in the urban centers than in such rural communities.
Well, I also think that there are a lot of factors that are playing in terms of why civil society operate more in the urban area and the rural society. Of course, the kind of civil society we have in Nigeria is also the donor-driven civil society organization. Of course, if you want to make changes, I think changes should come, or changes should be more organic without depending on donors, on funding to be able to do what you do. If you see most of the donor design projects, a lot of them are urban-centered projects. They are projects that look forward to civil society organizations that are in the cities. Local civil society, they exist. They exist in the form of CBOs. They exist in the form of youth organizations. They exist in the form of women organizations. But these same people don't really have the capacity to actually push the idea to the urban areas where you have donors supporting their program. That is one of the reasons why you have civil society organizations more localized within the urban area than the local setting. And this completely differentiates the local people from the benefit of what civil society should be doing. But I will give it to some of civil society organizations. They have spread across the country. They have projects at the grassroots. They have projects in the urban center. So they've been able to strike a balance between what they do at the grassroots and also what they do at the urban center. But by and large, I think civil society should do more within the local area, especially now that local government have been given autonomy. And if we don't concentrate within the local area where we work, more of the corruption that we try to fight in the urban area will be happening at the local area without we even knowing what is going on. I think to a large extent, the donor-driven economy of civil society has actually contributed to that largely.
Thank you, Newton. Let me throw that same question to Austin here, because he has just identified one of the challenges that civil society groups, organizations face in Nigeria. Are there any more?
No, civil society is not about donor. And that's why I said there are three, the economy of political landscape is rested on a tripod. These three need to work together. So for instance, there are many alumni associations that are building schools in the rural area. There are many churches who are building a lot of infrastructure in the rural area. But to be candid, I was part of a report while I was at the CDD, funded by the EU Art project, on the role of CSO in Nigeria. It was so huge that we are not even counting them. Sincerely, in a particular community in Enugu, we were told, as part of research work, that they don't even know where government, they don't know government. That the people they know, they mention their names, and they were CSOs, CBOs, who come to their location, organizations like ActionAid, who move around trying to identify local projects. There are many. Of course, there are organizations at the national level, there are those at the sub-national level, and there are those at the local level. There are organizations, when you talk about Osusu, Osusu, when they come together to develop themselves, that is civil society organization. They may not have a registered status as CAC, because usually we tend to classify civil society organization on the basis of your registration, which is CAC. No, that would be cutting short the huge work. In fact, the resources beyond donor, before donor, after donor, civil society will continue to engage in development action that is developing local area. Go to some communities. They will tell you that this facility, this health facility, was given to us by the town union. This one was given to us by the youth association. These are civil society organizations, and there are very many. In my state, in my village, they will tell you, apart from the road structure, the infrastructure of the road, which has poorly done gutter, that the youth came out to then reinforce it. That's not government now reinforcing it. The people saw that there's a gap in what has been done, and they need to reinforce it. That is civil society organization. It is just too much. It's good that people need to look at Google. The role of CSO in Nigeria is online to see the enormous contribution, whether at the National Assembly level, whether at the executive level, whether at the judiciary. Each CSO has some level of, professionalism. There are those in elections. There are those in research, very huge CSO organization doing research work, doing budget analysis. In fact, if you want to get the best budget analysis now, get on a civil society organization, what they call, I forgot their name right now. And there are many of them doing this work. Budget, thank you. Budget. If you want to know what's happening, go there. If you want to know what's happening with the election work, go on Yaga. If you want to know what's happening on maybe development, particularly security, architecture in Nigeria and around insurgency, go on CDD. There are many organizations, women-led organizations. You want to know about how women are faring in business, in economy, how women are faring in politics. Go on so many. WIPF, Women Politics Forum, and a couple of them. I mean, Partners for Electoral Reform. They've done huge work. But you cannot look at civil society's role from one lens. If a civil society...
Is Newton not correct when he says that most of these civil society organizations are donor funded?
That is because of the number you are looking at. How many civil... If you remove the churches, because you are looking at those registered with CAC, I am telling you that there are those registered with state Ministry of Women Affairs and all of that. There are those that are not registered at all. The civil society belongs to the non-state sector. These are the domain, and they contribute to what the government is doing. And if there is no enabling environment for businesses to strive by work done by civil society, how will business flourish? How will business flourish? We are talking about climate change today. Civil society are putting a lot of issues. Pay attention to climate change. It will hamper our future. It is civil society pushing government to take policy action that changes the course of action.
Okay. Comrades, what do you consider to be major challenges that civil society organizations face in the Nigeria of today? Or at least since when Nigeria returned to civil democratic rule?
One big issue is lack of capacity. And sometimes we don't like to do the mirror thing of looking at ourselves. I like to call it the arrogance of civil society. The arrogance that we know everything. We are better than government. We are better than everybody. But that's not true. There are people in government who have 4 PhDs in different fields, and is not honorary causa. They understand those things. So when we want to approach issues, we have to approach it from the point of knowledge. And that is the lack of investment in knowledge, knowing for the purpose of engagement. And I think Austin or Newton alluded to that fact. Research, using research work to engage, not just what you think. And sometimes what has even happened is that longevity in the space does not mean knowledge. So most times when Eze says it, then it must be true. That's not correct. The fact that Eze said it may not be true. I might be working on residual knowledge, things that I have known. I may not be contemporary in understanding the current issues that deal with that. So investment in capacity building is important. The most, you were talking about, I don't like to call them rural, I think subnational organizations. people are afraid of what is close. They don't fear what is far. The stranglehold of the despotism that you have in the state does not allow civil society to thrive the way it should. What do I mean? Budget can do a budget analysis for all the states. If you do that in the state, if you are a state-based organization and you do that, you may not. If you travel around Nigeria, just listening on radio, you will find out that most of the programs that are going on those radio stations are talking about Abuja. Anything they want to talk about the state is where the governor went to, who he visited, who came to see him. It is not because they cannot do the same things that are done outside, but because of the constraints. So we need to liberalize and empower states, state-based organizations, to be able to confront issues. And the only way we can do that is to also curtail, begin to challenge the power of the governors in using state institutions to oppress their own citizens. The state judiciary is an extension, oftentimes, of the governor's office. The State House of Assembly is virtually not as free as you can go to the National Assembly and make issues. Even the State House of Assembly itself cannot make resolutions that challenge the decisions of the governor. So when you then talk about, states,
I've hardly heard of.
but there is something that
state
Austin,
assemblies organizing public hearings.
there is something Austin has been trying to talk about, which is to talk about, and I thought that the conversation is not just, if you talk about the Gramsci's definition of civil society, you are talking about us, but the wider civil society and groups, the role they play is immense. Community development associations and all the rest of them. But if you are defining civil society groups and organizations that are registered, the limitation is also that they are more project-driven, and project is tenured. So what is it? You give me money to do a particular project, and the duration is 3 years. After the 3 years, the money dries up, and I'm out of that. So that is itself. So what we need to think through now is the creation of movements, which is what we used to respond. Movements were used to respond to the military, not so much civil society in the sense in which we are defining it. And what does that mean? Whether there was support or no support, activities were going on. People were contributing. You are part of this, so you understand what I'm talking about. We had an announced Senate meeting on the top of Udi Hills. The military had barricaded UNN. We had to go to Udi Hills, and that was where the decision to support the transition program was taken in 1992. So the point that I'm making is that it's not just about the donors also have become a limiting issue in terms of the aggregation of projects. So that's a limiting. Then government itself that has not weaned itself out of the dictatorship that it inherited. In terms of what Newton was talking about, cracking down on alternative voices. If people organize protests, they should be supported to be able to have a protest. But we must also define what a protest is, what a demonstration is, and what a riot is. If you are organizing a riot, you cannot be supported. If you organize a protest, you should be supported to air your views and articulate the grievances that you have. So when we have a riot, let us not mistake it for protest. They don't mean the same thing.
All right. So as we round off our discussion, let's look into the future. Civil society is strong on advocacy. On many fronts, it's strong on advocacy. Beyond the advocacy, beyond the project-driven CSOs that we have, as we have put it, what else do you think that CSOs can do to impact directly the lives of the people?
But this is you are going back to what I talked about, which is the arrogance that we can do. We have a limit. We are an advocacy group. What beyond policy briefs and articulating these things. We are not the ones to implement. After you have tracked your budget, after you have done, go and implement the budget. You are not the one to implement the budget. So the much you can do is to continue to put pressure, by building yourself in the people. And that's what I'm talking about. Let us not become non-governmental institutions. We should be non-governmental organizations embedded in people, making people own the power to struggle. What do I mean by that? You go and, for instance, cite a project in a community, to do a road in a community, and you have to build culverts, and you have to put street lights, and then you build the culvert alone, and you didn't put the street lights, you didn't build the culverts. The community that has the benefit of that should be able to say, what is the specification of this job that has been brought to our community? They don't need an NGO to do that. They don't need an Abuja-based, they don't need Austin to come and tell it. They should be able to own that project. When borehole is drilled in your community, and the only time water is drank from that borehole is the day of the commissioning. When the commissioning ends, there is no more water. You are waiting for me in Abuja to come and say that the borehole they sank for you is an abortive borehole. The point that I'm making is that the people themselves must understand that democracy does not envisage the rise of personality cults and those people who are hero worshipped. We should end that. The military should be the end of that. The people must be galvanized to own the struggles for the improvement of their lives through the different NUTs there for primary and secondary education, Nigerian Medical Association, all kinds of people. If you aggregate the power that these organizations have, some of the challenges that we have in our country will not be there.
Austin, very quickly, 60 seconds.
These are CSOs. CSOs is not about registered organization, I repeat. And it is important to put it on the table that there are many organizations who are doing great, great, great work. As I said, the time we move beyond civil society to begin to have NGOs, we disconnected from the civic system. And the civic system is the people. No democracy will ever come in 1999 if the civic system, that is the people, were not part of that struggle.
So
they would have died.
Right.
It is not partner with people. It is the people-led. It's people-centric. Any civic organization that is not people-centric will only be project-driven and donor-driven, and it dies with the funds.
Thank you so much. Newton, 30 seconds. Your last take.
Outside advocacy, research, and consultations that we've been doing as civil society organizations, I think when it gets to implementation, we need an organic social movement that will push government to that extent where implementation are actually carried out. I think we need it right now in Nigeria, a very strong social movement that has no boundary respective of what you are doing, respective of your tribe, respective of your class, and what have you. That social movement.
All right, thank you so much, Newton.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And gentlemen, thank you for your time. Comrade Ezewanwagu is a board member of Yaga Africa, Executive Director Operation Nigeria, and Executive Director Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa. Thank you so much for your time. Austin Aigbe is a member of the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS, a former senior program officer at the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD. Thank you for your time. And Newton Osemaye, Program Director, Initiative for Policy Intervention and Development, and a consultant to Action Aid Nigeria on system and structure strengthening approach against radicalization to violent extremism. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time on the program today. And for our viewers out there, we want to thank you immensely for joining us on the program. We'll join you again when we bring you a fresh edition of the program. But for now, we are moving on to bring you a live event from here in the nation's capital, Abuja.